It's an age-old question, hyenas, a question that perhaps humanity may never be able to truly answer. How much dedicated Wam do you need for Minecraft server? Have you ever thought about that?
I was wondering, what's the recommended amount of dedicated Wam I should have to a server?
So Apple just unveils their newest MacBook, the MacBook Neo, which basically feels like a revitalized version of the age-old MacBook Air. This thing has mobile processing, mobile internals. People who have torn apart this thing have described it as a laptop that feels like it was built exactly like an iPhone. But the thing is $600. It's one of the cheapest brand new MacBooks that Apple has ever released. So clearly it's been designed for students or people who are looking for a lightweight notebook that is also designed for lightweight tasks. But still, it begs the question that in the big 2026, with Apple already having, a suitable market share for their MacBooks designed for professionals and what have you, should it be acceptable that a laptop in the year of 2026 still only be shipped with 8 gigabytes of RAM? I mean, we're all under the impression that RAM prices are skyrocketing because of the AI infrastructure and more data centers and more RAM being allocated to AI than ever before. But a lot of people are still under this discussion of, if we're going to make a computer that is designed for a student who may be doing anything from simply taking notes and watching YouTube videos to learning how to work with SolidWorks, AutoCAD, Photoshop, Premiere Pro, and what have you, is this thing going to hold up for anybody when it only ships with 8 gigabytes of RAM in an Apple form factor of which you cannot upgrade, repair, or anything? Is this thing going to be worth your money? And as somebody who worked as a computer salesman for the better part of almost 7 years of my life, I feel like a lot of you guys don't even know that, I'm weirdly qualified to answer this question, because back when I was selling computers, I would answer the question, hey, how much RAM do I need / is 8 gigabytes of RAM gonna be enough? Several times a day, 5 days a week for 7 years of my life. And boy, back 8 years ago when I was doing this day in and day out, I still feel like this is the most common question I got. And somehow here, 8 years later, it is still the topic of discussion, the hot button issue amongst people who are shopping for a new laptop. So let me share my thoughts. Now, first of all, before we get into a discussion when it comes to what kind of computer you need, what kind of computer any sort of consumer, individual person might want. The thing that you need to understand, the thing that I only learned after being a salesman doing this professionally for many, many years, after being the computer nerd who would be the go-to person to recommend to my friends and family what kind of laptop, what kind of computer they should buy for gaming, for school, blah, 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 whatever. The difference between doing this as an amateur, as the computer guy, as the dude who has all of his information from Reddit and the PC Master Race subreddit and just recommending things willy-nilly without any sort of professionalism behind it, is that you can kind of say whatever the fuck you want, right? When you're just a name on the internet, when there is no credibility tied to you, if you recommend somebody to buy something and their computer turns out to be bad, that's that person's fault for listening to you, because at the end of the day, you're just a family friend who knows computers, blah, 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 whatever. If they end up buying something that doesn't end up working out for them, it's their fault for not doing their own research or trusting you, a family member, whomever, for making that decision. When you are a professional, whether that be either in computer sales or you're somebody like Marquez Brownlee, who is like the go-to authority, right? When he says something, there are going to be ramifications for if he's just blatantly talking out of his ass, right? The stakes are significantly higher. Right? For you to be able to say, hey, 8 gigabytes of RAM is going to be fine for a student as just a random person, people can listen to you or not, but there's no credibility behind you. And whether or not somebody does get away with using 8 gigabytes of RAM for school or not, if it doesn't work out, it's their fault, not yours. Versus if you're the person selling them the computer and they're saying, hey, I need to get into college, will 8 gigabytes of RAM be enough for school? You can't just say yes or no. In order to do your job, your due diligence, there are some follow-up questions such as, well, what are you going to be doing? Are you going into photography, video editing? Oh, you're a fucking architect, an engineer? You're going to be doing 3D modeling? And not only does this computer need to do that year one, but when it's a 4-year-old computer and you're a senior in college working on your final thesis, is this computer going to be able to keep up with the 3D modeling, the photo editing, the video editing, blah, blah, blah? the answer becomes teeny bit more complicated, and there's a lot more weight behind just going, yeah, man, 8 gigabytes will be enough, which is why there's some nuance to this discussion. And the second thing to keep in mind when you're talking about computers online is that you need to realize that you are talking about other people's money, and people are very, guarded about their money. They don't want to be scammed out of their money. They don't want to spend money on something that they feel like they don't need simply because their use case doesn't match what somebody else on the internet or in the computer store or on YouTube might be telling them that they need. They will feel scammed. They will feel bad if they end up spending more money on something that they needed. But in reality, that goes two ways, right? Spending more money on something that you need might be spending $1,000 on a laptop when you only needed to spend $500. That's the way most people interpret it. But the other way that people don't think about it is if you only spend $500 on a laptop and it doesn't work out for you, if 3 years into college, your senior year, that laptop is either falling apart, wasn't built well enough, and now the battery's dying or something, or now your 3-year-old laptop suddenly isn't good enough to handle your senior level modeling, photography, video editing, whatever. If it doesn't keep up with it, and God forbid, now you need a new laptop just for your senior year of college, you're basically now buying the thing twice, and you're effectively wasting the money you would have otherwise. The other thing to keep in mind is everything I am saying is wrong. Everything that anybody has ever said about computers on the internet will be wrong to somebody. To somebody. There is one guy out there on an AMD Athlon processor soldered into an Intel NUC with 1.5 gigabytes of RAM that he stole from NASA back in 1990, who is claiming that he can run Cyberpunk 2077 with ray tracing no problem, and anybody who spends money on more than 2 gigabytes of RAM is a dumbass. That also exists. And for some reason, when you have conversations about the 99% of other people, you inherently become wrong in using any sort of blanket statement such as you need this much, because there will be one guy in the world who's like, nope, I don't. So just accept that. That's just how it is. So how much RAM do you need? Not an easy question. Now, for 99% of people who are doing the absolute bare minimum, you might be able to get away with only 8 gigabytes of RAM. In fact, pretty much anybody who wants to do anything will be able to do it with 8 gigabytes of RAM. There is pretty much no application, no software, no browser that is going to go, sorry, I'm not going to start or do anything. You cannot use me because I can see you only have 8 gigabytes of RAM. Computers are smart. What they will instead do is move around pieces, allocate memory. They will make the space to do what you want it to. It's just that if it needs more space than you have, it will start to slug around, slow down, not work as optimally. And really, the issue is not so much whether or not your computer has enough RAM. More so, it becomes a matter of how much patience do you have to wait for your computer to do the things that it does. I always use this example, and I used to do this in store with brand spanking new computers when people would ask me. I would just pull up Task Manager and show them how much RAM the computer is using. Mine currently has 32 gigabytes of RAM, and because I am currently recording right now, it is using 26 gigabytes of RAM. I have pretty much nothing open. It's just the Adobe timeline and a couple tabs of Google Chrome, which, depending on who you ask, might be the equivalent of running a fucking triathlon as far as computers are concerned. But this is typical. Now, what computer savvy people will tell you is that if my computer only had 16 gigabytes of RAM, it would still be running just fine. In fact, it wouldn't be using 25 gigabytes of RAM. It would be using like 15. If I had 8 gigabytes of RAM, it wouldn't be using 15 gigabytes. It would consolidate things down to only using 7. It will use the space that it is given. In fact, the only reason that it has 25 gigabytes of RAM used right now is because a huge chunk of that is being allocated by programs. Not necessarily utilized, not necessarily prioritized, not taken away from anything, but just sort of put off to the side going, hey, I might need this 16 gigs here, so I'm going to grab it and say that it's being used, and therefore we get this number here. So if I had 8 gigabytes of RAM, would my computer be running just fine? Yeah, it would be. Editing, recording, watching a Twitch stream all at the same time. I could do that with a quarter of the RAM that I have right now. I would also want to blow my brains out. I think what happens with people is that they feel like if you have something, you have never not had it. I had this experience a lot when I was working in computer sales, where people would get upset with me because they'd be like, listen, you're a salesman, you can just recommend whatever you want, but you've never been on my side trying to shop for a computer. And like, they have this mentality that like, I've never been on the other side of something, which is ridiculous. Like, everybody in their life has stepped into a Best Buy or a computer store. Everybody has tried to put together a bunch of pieces for a computer that they need for college, for school. I've been a student. I've had 8 gigabytes of RAM. My first laptop was a MacBook Air with 4 gigabytes of RAM, and that got me through high school playing Minecraft, even recording some of my first YouTube videos. You think I'm not under the impression that 4 gigabytes of RAM back then or 8 gigabytes of RAM right now isn't going to be enough to do those things? Absolutely. I have been in those shoes. I have done those things. But you just saw my current real computer setup, right? Do I currently have 8 gigabytes of RAM? Fuck. If 4 gigabytes is enough to do everything that you wanted to, why am I spending what is $10,000 of memory nowadays on having 32 gigabytes of RAM? Shouldn't I be following my own advice? My advice is not to have 8 gigabytes of RAM, and I'm living the words that I'm speaking. There's a reason I have as much as I do, and there's a reason that I recommend that you have more of it too. My biggest issue with this conversation around having 8 gigabytes of RAM is not that there aren't people who are going to be just fine with 8 gigabytes of RAM. God forbid, a $600 MacBook that's got 8 gigabytes of RAM. Apple computers typically allocate memory relatively well compared to Windows computers because the software and the kernels and the OS and everything, right? No nerd shit. We're trying to keep this general. If I was buying a computer for my mom or my dad who are going to be doing nothing but like online banking and watching YouTube videos, I would not worry whatsoever about them only having 8 gigabytes of RAM. My issue, and this is something that I've had an issue with since a decade ago when I was selling computers and talking to people, is the notion that a student, somebody who is in school doing things, is the lowest tier of computer user. People use the word student as if it's the word peasant, as if it's the word child. They think that they need the most Coco Melon-esque laptop. They want a leapfrog laptop for their kid who is going into high school, God forbid, college, because they think that a college student is going to be doing nothing but writing essays, as if the laptop is not going to be the lifeblood of what they are capable of doing work-wise, relaxing-wise, making friends-wise. I feel like people don't know what a computer is to a young adult in a new environment like school. Do you know what I was doing in high school? When I was a junior in high school, in, what is that, 9th grade, right? 16 years old. Do you know what I was doing? I was downloading Skyrim from the Pirate Bay on like an HP Pavilion DV7. I'll put a picture. You know what this is. You know the $300 laptop special that existed at Best Buy. This thing had 4 gigabytes of RAM. It had 6 gigabytes of RAM because I scrounged together some money and bought 2 more gigabytes from Best Buy that was open box special and installed it myself with a screwdriver when I was 16 years old, right? This thing was running Skyrim on the lowest fucking setting. I was getting 12 FPS at best. I felt like I was watching a PowerPoint slideshow of this thing. I was editing YouTube videos. I was blowing up entire worlds in Minecraft with TNT just to see how sluggish I could make this thing. I was emulating old Super Mario games while I worked my part-time job as a front desk clerk. You know what I mean? I was jailbreaking my iPhone, downloading firmwares and shit. You know what I mean? I was 16. I was 16. I was a kid. I was in high school. And all the money we had was to throw at $350 at a laptop that was supposed to be for school, for homework. If you ask my mom, what kind of stuff is your kid up to as the salesperson, she wouldn't be telling you that he was gaming, video editing, learning 3D rendering. She wouldn't have said any of that. But I look back at the fact that I was able to do those things. I wasn't really able to do those things, right? The laptop sucked for that purpose. But imagine a world where my mom got me a Chromebook. My mom got me something that was so incapable of doing anything more than browsing the web and doing homework that your boy Sumito Media never learned how to edit a video. That your boy Sumito Media was never able to play lightweight PC games. If I wasn't able to play Terraria, download Steam, do any of this shit, I'd be a completely different person, a less capable person, perhaps a more quality to society person and less of a degenerate internet hyena, right? But the limitations that would have been put on me by that computer would have been catastrophic, because that thing was everything from my social ability, talking to people on AOL, playing video games. My entire character development would have been altered if that computer was less capable than it would be. You know what I mean? Maybe as an adult, you don't give a shit. Maybe the idea of your kid becoming some sort of creative, some sort of artist, somebody who's able to get into game design or learn coding or whatever, these more advanced things, to you feels like a distraction. You want them to only be touching keys when it's learning piano and playing violin or something like that. But I can't help but feel like putting these arbitrary limitations on somebody simply because of the expectations of what you think they might be into, when the difference between a good computer and a bad computer is like $200 or $300 extra dollars. Feels a little bit silly as somebody who is living through, you know, this end of the things. There are plenty of people in the world that are completely computer illiterate. They have absolutely no fucking idea how to use a computer. Adults, I'm talking about, right? That's fine. They seem to be working out just fine. Two final thoughts on this MacBook thing. A, you can't upgrade a MacBook, right? This would be a completely different conversation if you were spending $600 on a Windows computer that you could unscrew the bottom of and add more RAM down the line. Right? Because that's something that you've been able to do. I've got a fucking MSI laptop right there that's got 16 gigabytes of RAM in it when I bought it, and I upgraded it to 32 gigabytes of RAM because that was something I could do. And that computer is currently, that thing's like 6 or 7 years old, would blow that MacBook Neo out of the fucking water, because that thing still got, you know, like a 6-core i7 in it or something. I bought it open box back when I still worked at the computer store. But that's an option. The MacBook, on the other hand, pretty much any ultra-thin computer, not just Apple computers, aren't going to be something that you can upgrade down the road. So you are making a decision right now of how much RAM you are going to have for the life of this thing. 4 years, 8 years down the line. If you still want to be able to use this computer, you are still going to be stuck with 8 gigabytes of RAM. And I feel like everybody glosses over that. Everybody treats a computer as if it's something that you're only going to have right now, or something that you're only going to have for the next 2 or 3 years. If Microsoft decides to do an update to Microsoft Word, Microsoft PowerPoint, if Photoshop doesn't update, if the game you're playing doesn't update, fuck it. I have people who came into my store saying, I just want to be able to play The Sims. And my computer had 8 gigabytes of RAM, and it used to run The Sims fine, but now it's 6 years old, and it can't run The Sims at all. Do I buy a new computer with 8 gigabytes of RAM? No! Surely. No, you do not buy another computer with 8 gigabytes of RAM. You need more than that. Because even though you're playing the exact same game you were 6, 8 years ago, you now have 40 different fucking expansions. And I'm sorry to say that if you're playing The Sims with every fucking expansion that you've spent hundreds of dollars on, you're going to need a slightly more capable computer. I'm sorry you put yourself in that box. And that's true for everything. People talk about Google Chrome as if it's the world's most simplest software. Open up a tab of Chrome and see what it does to your RAM. People will tell you to use a different browser. People will tell you to completely change the way you use your computer in order to adjust to the limitations of the computer. Use a different browser. Use this free version of this. Don't download these games. Turn down your settings. All to do what? Avoid spending the extra $200 on just getting something that's more capable? Live your life the way that you want to. Buy the tools appropriate for the thing that you're doing. That's just common sense, no? My last thought is that more power in a computer is never wasted. It's almost never wasted. Even if the only thing that you're doing is browsing the web and watching YouTube videos, you might expect that you'd be able to get away with a $200 Black Friday Costco special laptop. Who cares if it's slow? I'm only using it for the absolute basics. And the reality is that that's kind of fucking stupid. Now, again, talked about this at the beginning of the video. We're talking about other people's money. If the only thing you have is $200 to your name and you have to buy a laptop, don't take out a loan to go and get a more important computer. There are other things you should be spending your money on. But if you have the budget to be able to accommodate something more capable, you should always be buying something more capable. I remember going to my aunt's house because she was having an issue with her computer, and she had one of these $200 Black Friday special laptops. And just for me to turn this thing on and get it to the desktop where I could move around the mouse and find out what's going on took 15 fucking minutes. I had to sit in this living room with no air conditioning, waiting for this thing to turn on. It took me damn near 3 hours hours just to uninstall some stupid plugin she had on her browser, remove some free trial antiviruses that were installed, wait for all the stupid pop-ups to come up so that I could close them. The most simple thing in the world that on my computer would have taken 45 seconds took me 3 goddamn hours because I had to restart this computer several times and wait for it to boot up. And I cannot tell you how much of a waste. Now, listen, maybe you have all the fucking time in the world. Maybe you don't mind spending several hours doing the most mundane shit in the world. Surely you can agree that a student hopping into a lecture who needs to open their computer and immediately start taking notes, or download the pages for their textbook, or submit something by midnight, or sign up for a class right at 4 a.m., maybe shouldn't have the absolute slowest tool in the world to do the job of which they are paying tens of thousands of dollars a semester to be able to do correctly. We can agree on that, right? And when it's somebody else's education, time, life, social viability that is on the line, are you gonna feel comfortable going, hey, this thing will be enough? Does it not make you feel a little bit more comfortable saying, maybe you get the thing that can do it no problem? Maybe you get more RAM. Maybe you get a better computer. God forbid you do your work faster. God forbid it's better at the things that you want it to. God forbid that over the course of 4 years, spending an extra $400 to get a really solid computer comes back and bites you in the ass because you're $400 short of paying for the riverman to take you across the river Styx, and now your soul burns in hell for all of eternity because you spent too much on a laptop for college. If that's the case, I apologize sincerely. One of my biggest issues as a salesman is that I had this extremely elitist take on all of these things because I felt incredibly qualified. We had weekly trainings talking about the newest updates with Microsoft, with Apple, with hardware, with software, with everything that was going on. I was incredibly well educated, well versed on what the capabilities of these machines were. On top of the fact that I was already a bit of a tech nerd, so I understood all of this stuff at a base level on top of the training I was getting. Also, I was in college while working this computer job. So I felt like I knew every aspect of this. I was so incredibly vetted, so incredibly well qualified to speak on the topic of what a student, whom I am, would need for college, which I am in regards to computers, which I know very well that you're gonna buy from the store where I work. You know what I mean? So I was always in the situation where parents would come in or students would come in and they'd be like, hey, my friend tells me that I don't need more than 4 gigabytes of RAM. I'm going into college. Will a Chromebook be good enough for me? And I had to keep having these long, lengthy conversations, which I loved because a huge part of me enjoys educating people about something that I love as much as computers. That's why I'm making this video now, despite having not worked in this industry in the better part of probably 6-7 years at this point. 6, 7. That's where we're at. If you are in the market for an Apple computer for school and you want to buy the $700 MacBook Neo, you are probably going to be just fine. You're probably going to be just fine. You don't need to do any more research. If this is the only video you're watching, you're probably going to be just fine. That being said, if you want to spend $700-800 and get yourself a Windows computer, or spend $1,000 on getting yourself a MacBook Pro that's got 16 gigabytes of RAM or a more capable processor, you are not going to waste your money. Even if you never, ever push your computer to the point where it does more than what the MacBook Neo is capable of doing, at the very least, that computer 6 years down the line will be better at being a 6-year-old computer because you bought a better computer to start with. And if the only thing you're doing is lightweight stuff, well, fuck. Now, instead of buying a shitty computer that might break 4 years down the road, you bought a half-decent computer that's not going to break 4 years down the road and will still be able to do the simple web browsing and text editing and job applications that you needed to. You can do that. It's totally fine. There's nothing wrong with spending a little more money on a computer. Some people do it for fun. Or at the very least, if you buy a faster computer, it'll make it so that your computer tech savvy friend who has to inevitably help you fix it because you downloaded something stupid won't have to sit in your unair conditioned living room for 3 hours waiting for it to restart over and over again. And that guy, you definitely owe a couple of beers to. Thank you so much for watching this video. Subscribe if you want more stuff like this. I don't know why the fuck you would subscribe for more stuff like this, but thanks for watching nonetheless. I'll catch you guys on the next one. Peace.